Hello, and welcome back to the Caregivers Journal, the show where we're talking with caregivers about their experiences and their caregiving journey. Welcome, everybody, to the Caregivers Journal with myself, Lance Slatton, and my esteemed colleague and co-host, Miss Denise Brown. Good to see you, Denise. How are you today?
I'm great, Lance. Always good to see you. I love when we get together for our show.
Yes, and we are actually starting spring break today here in Michigan, but it feels more like winter break. We have about 6 inches of snow on the ground, so it's been a nice surprise. And what do they say? Goes in like a lamb or comes out like a lion? I don't know, but it's not fun out there. I want to welcome our guest today, and today we're on Chapter 3 of the Caregiver's Journal, and we're going to be talking about the unexpected crisis. First, I'd like to go to Angelena Taylor. Welcome, Angelena.
Hi, Lance. Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. You want to take a moment and introduce yourself a little bit and tell a little bit about your background to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Angelena Taylor. I am the current Miss USA World Universal Ambassador. I am a caregiver for my father of 8 years, stroke survivor and veteran, and I will be launching soon after taking Denise's Careers Academy course for caregiving specialists. I'll be launching my business, the Crown the Caregiver.
Oh, wonderful. We'll have to talk and learn more about what Crown the Caregiver is. Well, thank you for being here and for taking time to share your story and your journal entry with us. Next, I'd like to go to Debbie Weiss.
Hi, and thank you both for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Debbie Weiss. I have been a caregiver for over 40 years, started when I was 17, and I became a caregiver to my dad, who had a massive stroke at 46 and was permanently disabled. And then my oldest son at 2 was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. And then most recently, I became the caregiver to my husband, who became permanently disabled due to a variety of both physical and mental illness, and received a sudden cancer diagnosis that unfortunately he only survived for 6 months.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, we appreciate you being here, Debbie, and sharing your experiences and your journal entry. Next, we'll go to RoxAnne Daignault. Did I get that right, RoxAnne?
RoxAnne Daignault.
Daignault. Well, welcome.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Lance. I am coming from a small Northern Ontario community in Canada. And I have been parenting my own daughter for the past and caregiving my own daughter for the past 17 years as she's struggled with many mental illnesses over that period of time. And through those experiences, I had approached my community, and now I'm working as a parenting mental health support worker for our community here to help other parents.
Wow. Well, thank you for being here and for sharing your journal entry with us. Next, I get to welcome our co-host, Denise Brown. Denise?
It's so good to be with everybody today. We so appreciate you taking the time out to share your stories. I have been supporting family caregivers since 1990. I just finished my own caregiving experience. My dad died in July. I helped him for just about 20 years. And just about a year before he died, my mom died. My mom died in August of 2022, and I helped her for 7 years.
Yeah. You know, Denise, we're on Chapter 3 today of the journal. And, you know, the first chapter was Diagnosis Day. Chapter 2, we talked about the path to a diagnosis. And today in Chapter 3, we're talking about the unexpected crisis. And, you know, thinking about today, I think the unexpected crisis could probably be a resonating theme throughout the whole journal. But how do you see that fits into the story of caregiving, Denise?
It's interesting to think about how caregiving can start. And sometimes it does start with you notice something's not quite right with a family member and you seek the diagnosis. And that really was the first 2 chapters. And then sometimes it starts because of a sudden medical event. And everything changes in a moment. And that's the important topic for today. What we're really trying to do is think through what's the experience any family caregiver might have, and then to bring in the stories and support to help them where they are in their caregiving experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, We appreciate our guests joining us today to talk about these experiences. And I want to start with Angelena Taylor. You are Miss USA Ambassador World Universal. I got to start right there. Explain what that title is.
Absolutely, Lance. Yes, so I actually started competing in pageants as a way to bring awareness to caregiving and to support my fellow caregivers. So I competed in Louisiana at the Miss USA World Universal pageant last October and was crowned Miss USA Ambassador.
That's wonderful. Congratulations to that. And, I think that's what a unique way to really try to tie that in to raise awareness for caregiving. So congratulations. I want to talk a little bit about your father and, your experience there. Where were you when you learned that your father had a stroke?
Oh my goodness. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was on my way home from work. I was working as a registered behavior technician. I work in the field of ABA, working with kids on the autism spectrum. So I was on my way home from work, normal routine, called my dad, to see what he wanted for dinner. Wasn't getting any response on the phone, which is usually not like him. He's twice retired from law enforcement. So he's usually home, or he was taking my aunt or another family member out to their own appointments, and, not getting that response. I wasn't really thinking anything of it. And I just thought, maybe he's taking a nap. And then I get home and, just go about the usual, bring in the mail, go in his room, check on him. And I thought he was sleeping. He was laying in the bed. And I, saw him kind of move out the corner of my eye. And I'm like, oh, sorry, didn't mean to wake you. I started talking about, dinner, telling him, he had some mail that came in and he never responded. And so my dad's a big jokester. So I thought, he was just messing with me, pretending he was still asleep or something. And I happened to turn around, he still wasn't moving. So I got closer to him. I'm telling him, hey, cut it out. I'm not really feeling that great. I just want to get dinner done and figured out and out the way. And the closer I got to him, he started to squeeze my hand. And that's what told me that something was wrong. And we had just actually undergone some training at my job to recognize the signs of stroke during our CPR and first aid class. So immediately I knew, just saying, that he wasn't responding, with any verbal speech. The side of his face had that drooping, that slanted, look to his face. So it was just immediately, okay, he has the signs of stroke. I'm going to call 911. I called them, let them know. I think my dad's had a stroke. He's not able to get out of the bed. He's not moving. They wanted me to move him out of the bed, but his bed was on like a raised platform. So I told them, I don't think that's possible. So as soon as the EMS got here, they rushed him to the hospital, and that's where the doctors confirmed that he had suffered a stroke, a hemorrhagic stroke.
Wow. Were they able to administer TPN or anything? Or?
That I'm not sure. I know once we got back there, they did, take him back for scans and testing and everything where they confirmed it. And then I believe he was in an induced coma for a few days after that. So it was a very scary and very traumatizing time, not knowing what was going to happen.
Absolutely. What changed for you personally after your father's stroke? I'm assuming probably everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was only 28 at the time, so I was fairly still, younger. I'm 36 now, but seemed like life just flashed before my eyes. I was just starting my master's degree program at Wayne State to pursue my ABA studies, and I couldn't imagine what things were going to be like from that point forward. I just thought, he's going to be in the hospital, recover. But then once it was time for him to come home, he spent a few months in the rehabilitation center. And then, let's see, he was in from like November to about January. And then they sent him home, no type of real preparation for what to expect. It was just, we're going to send you home with some equipment. This is, the number to the OT, PT that's going to come out to the house. And that was pretty much it.
How's your dad doing now? What was his diagnosis?
His diagnosis, he has hemiparesis, so he has no use of the right side of his body. We had to go through several rounds of physical therapy, occupational therapy. It's it's been, a wild roller coaster, but he's in really good health. Like he's doing a lot better. I know he probably wishes that he were, still mobile, but he's happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah. What's the level of care you would say that you provide? Is it full care, part-time care?
I would say that it's full care. There's not a lot that he requires throughout the day. The doctors, always suggest that we rotate since he can't turn himself in the bed. So we do, rotations of what he'll allow. Because a lot of times he experiences neuropathy, a lot of neural pain, which thankfully we're finally getting that managed. We switched over to a geriatrician who is absolutely wonderful. And he's, like I said, he's feeling 100% now. Um, but it's pretty much a full-time requirement being here, being able to do his meals, preparing his medication, transporting him to and from his appointments, managing the household. So it's pretty much a full-time job.
I wasn't a stroke for my father, but a similar circumstance where just all of a sudden I found myself now in the role of a family caregiver. Though I always tell people I never identified as a caregiver when I was going through it. I was a son trying to help a parent. And I don't know for you if you identified as a family caregiver or if you were just a daughter helping a father. But how did you find caregiving under 30 different from others who are maybe caring for parents who are elderly and they're in their, 50s, 60s, or, even older? What would you say is the biggest difference between the two roles?
Yeah, there's definitely a huge difference. Even though we all, we're all on that same care spectrum, there's definitely a huge difference with timelines. As I mentioned, I was in school. I just started that master's program. So a lot of people my age at the time are, transitioning into their full-time careers. They're finishing up school, whereas older caregivers that are, in their late 30s or mid 40s or older, they've already established careers. They've already raised their families. For me, I haven't had the chance to get married or have kids yet. I didn't have to put school on hold, so that was a plus. My program was only a year and a half, so I was able to finish that. But that was still, hard to manage because a lot of people don't understand what that's like. If they're not in the shoes of a caregiver, they still expect you to fulfill everything that you've set up for.
Yeah, I know for myself, I was actually pursuing medical school at the time, and they don't teach you about caregiving in medical school. It's not medical, right? It's social, and I always found it interesting that everybody was sympathetic, but they couldn't really put themselves in my shoes, right? Because nobody, at least in my peer group, nobody was going through that, thankfully. And it's just I found that to be one of the most challenging things is having people really understand. But then, as you get older and wiser, some say, you realize you can't expect somebody to really understand something that they haven't gone through. And I think that's what, we all do, trying to raise awareness for what family caregivers go through day to day. So you found it difficult, easy, more or less when you're trying to balance this, your education / going into this new career versus your caregiving role?
Um, that's actually a great question. It was a mix of feelings and emotions. It kind of started out to be a little mildly difficult, I feel like, because we had started a routine. I had hired care to come in to help with, the days that I'd be at school or my practicum. But over time, it became a lot more stressful, a lot more difficult, just because I had to throw in like taking him to outpatient, outpatient rehabilitation services. So we'd have to go to OT and PT. So I had to manage like leaving my practicum, being able to get to and from class. There's always little incidents that come up with our care, our care person where it's like, oh, this was an unexpected event. I'm going to be late. A lot of that, like I said, people just don't expect it, and they kind of think that you're making excuses or that you're not responsible. But it's like, hey, this is a lot and it's difficult. There were a lot of sleepless nights, just for the fact that my dad didn't have his own internal routine down. Like he'd be up a lot of hours, or he would need me in the middle of the night, and he'd either try to pick up the phone to call my phone in the middle of the night, or he'd be yelling for me. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's wrong? And it would just be, it wouldn't be an emergency. So a lot of sleepless nights, having to stay up and do homework for sleepless nights as well. So it was a very stressful time.
It is very stressful. Looking back, would you do anything differently?
Actually, I would probably have put school on hold just for the fact that it added a lot of unnecessary stress. I'm glad to have it completed, but I can't get that time back with my dad. So me being able to focus on that and be with him, it was a lot, but I would have preferred to, come back to school at a later date if I could, and just spend that additional time with him and making sure that he was getting everything that he needed, but making sure that, everything was just, us going
Right.
off force with everything.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Angelena, for being here and for sharing that. I want to go to Denise now.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Thanks, Angelena. Debbie, I saw you nodding as Angelena was sharing her story and her insights. I'm curious what was resonating for you.
Oh, so much, because our stories are similar in that my dad had a stroke when I was 17 and I became his caregiver. And so I completely understood what she was saying about the difference of being a younger caregiver versus an older, because I've been both. And, like you said, when you're older, it's not like you expect it, but I think you do kind of expect it, right? That's what we do. We take care of our parents as they age. So when we're 50 and 60, that's what we do. But to be in your 20s, that's not what any of us expect. And not that when it happens at 50, we know what to do, but, we're more seasoned in life and resources. And it's easier.
Something that struck me when Angelena was talking was the impact on your future is significant. And I'm curious, when you think about what has changed in the future for you, when you were 17 and then with your son and then with your husband, what comes to mind?
Well, being so young, it certainly changed the trajectory of my life as far as decisions that I made. I had gone away to college, but then decided to come home, take care of my dad, and still go to college locally. And as I was in my 20s, I had to worry about where my father was living. He was not living with me, but I all of a sudden had to learn the difference between Medicare and institutional Medicaid. And I didn't even know what health insurance was at that point, right? At like your early 20s. And my friends were all taking vacations and I couldn't. I have to say, I felt sorry for myself. It was a big burden.
It's hard not to have that empathy for you when you think about that impact. And I would imagine the loneliness of that experience, simply because there wasn't a peer who could understand, who was sharing a similar lifestyle, must have also been significant. How do you think you managed to move through and keep going?
So I put my head down and just kept going, which was not, in hindsight, the best way to do that, because I would find myself so often frustrated, resentful, a little bit explosive, at the smallest thing would set me off. And so it took me, unfortunately, about 30 years to realize that I need to prioritize my own self-care in addition to taking care of everybody else, because I wasn't showing up as the person I wanted to show up as for my family members and my loved ones that I was caring for.
I think that's such an important insight, that we can lose ourselves. And what I don't think that people get is that we lose the essence of ourselves, our personality, our demeanor, our zest for life. It goes away when there's so much stress. You had a significant moment where you decided, I'm going to change that perspective. Tell us about that.
Sure. So in addition to taking care of my dad, when my oldest son was 2, he was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. And it was a different type of caregiving. And I was caring for him. And I have a younger son as well. And, all the other things that life's responsibilities. And my dad was still alive. So I was caring for them both simultaneously. And when I turned 50, my friends insisted on taking me away for a weekend to celebrate. And I thought, I can't leave everyone. How am I going to leave, my dad and my husband with this responsibility with my kids and all the things? I went away and I was amazed how quickly I practically forgot their names. Not what I expected. I thought that every minute I'd be checking on them. But instead, I really reconnected with who I was. I didn't even know who I was as a person because my whole adult life I've been taking care of others and putting them first. And I had an aha moment where I really realized I did lose myself. I had lost the essence of who I was. And there was something about turning 50, that 50 number, that kind of made me reassess what I wanted life to look like moving forward.
It's that milestone of time that has gone by. And you think about how much time is left. And I think you decide, I know that time is passing and I've got to do something different. When you returned home from your trip, what did you do differently?
Well, I started making sure that I was doing something for me as well. And that included setting boundaries with my loved ones, which was difficult because there had never been any boundaries before.
Okay, so I'm going to make an assumption what that means. It sounds like you were always available. And it didn't matter if it was a significant need or a need they could have taken care of themselves, you were there to manage it.
Absolutely right.
It's interesting because in caregiving, we have these critical pressing needs that we are responsible for managing. And I think that puts us into a space of believing everything is critical, everything is pressing, and it's our responsibility. We must. It's very difficult to have that pivot from releasing that guilt about, wait a minute, maybe it's not just me, into believing that boundaries are healthy, boundaries are good for everyone. That change then, when you got home around setting boundaries, I'm sure made everybody a little uncomfortable, including yourself. How did you manage that discomfort?
It was very uncomfortable for all of us at first. Absolutely, because nobody was used to that. I was there to solve every problem, like you said, from the tiniest to the most monumental. And people, my husband, my son, my father, they definitely, had something to say about it. But over time, just introducing something small, maybe it's you have to wait 15 minutes. Maybe it's I'm just going to this exercise class. Anything, unless it's an emergency, it can wait for an hour until I return. And they got used to it.
What we learn during caregiving is how to set priorities. It does not come overnight. It takes practice. But what you set were boundaries around priorities. And instead of believing that all pressing needs or all needs of others were the priorities, you decided my needs are part of that list of priorities, and I'm going to figure it out. I'm curious, what was one priority you set for yourself that really made a difference?
For me, it was going to jazzercise because that is something that, it's good for my physical health. But honestly, it was even better for my mental health because I would go for that hour. And as soon as the music started, all I had to think about was singing the songs, because that's what I like to do, and following the steps. And there was nothing else on my mind. I forgot the to-do list. I forgot the stress of anything that was going on at home. And it just allowed me to decompress. And no matter how uptight, because I feel like I was always walking through that door, just tight as a drum, I would always leave, with an exhale, and then would be able to show up at home in a better way for what was needed.
So jazzercise gave you what's called flow. And when you're in flow, you focus only on what's in front of you, what your body is doing. Everything else is just not part of your awareness. And I'm curious how relationships in your family changed because you made that a priority for yourself.
It definitely changed for the better, because I wasn't as, I hate to say explosive. It wasn't like I was walking around yelling at everybody all the time, but I was always on edge, I think. And when I lost that edge, I had more patience, and it was a calmer place to be.
Yeah, I can see that. And I like how you have made the distinction between it wasn't like you were a raging ball of anger. It was really that you just weren't able to relax in your day. And that inability to relax is so dangerous to our health. It's so important that we give ourselves that moment to just relax. Jazzercise gave you that opportunity to relax. I'm curious what else helped you really relax, that everybody was okay and you didn't have to be on high alert 24/7.
So in my last caregiving situation with my husband, he survived for 6 months after his MDS, or blood cancer, diagnosis. And, it was very, very stressful. He also suffered from depression and anxiety. So, all things being equal, he wasn't really, I don't want to say rational, because that's not the right word, but, besides having physical illness, it was the mental illness as well. And I decided to do something I still can't believe I decided to do, which was write a book, something I had never thought about doing. And it had kind of come into my mind right prior to his diagnosis. And then when I received his diagnosis, I went to my therapist and I said, I'm so embarrassed that I'm even still thinking about doing this at such a time. I'm embarrassed that I'm saying this to you. And she said, I completely disagree with you. This is the perfect time, because you will need something just for yourself, separate from this caregiving crisis that you are and will be going through. And she was right.
Okay, we're going to hold that thought about the book and we're going to revisit that when we get into our best practices, because I think you and Angelena have really started a theme about what do we do for ourselves? And it's also how do we challenge ourselves during an already challenging situation and feel like we can actually be successful in that challenge. And now we're going to move over to Lance and RoxAnne is going to share her story.
Thank you, Denise. RoxAnne, welcome. I want to take a few moments and talk about your experience, because yours is one that is different than Debbie and Angelena's, and that is care for a child, which is, difficult. And, we talk to family caregivers often, and it's usually 1 out of 10 that's caring for a child with special needs or a health issue. And, research seems to show that that's usually because the parents are keeping that private and they don't want to discuss it, so they don't acknowledge the issue. I want to talk to you about your situation. Tell us about the day that you realized that your daughter was in the midst of a significant crisis, and if looking back, if you've noticed any signs that maybe you didn't pick up on at the time, or you kind of just discarded as nothing serious, and kind of what led to that initial crisis.
Yeah, so thank you, Lance. It's great to have this opportunity to be able to share our stories like this. My story started with my daughter in high school. She was diagnosed with an eating disorder and some self-harm. And I have to tell you, at that time, we looked for care. We were able to get care. We had to go outside of our community. So we had to travel 500 kilometers every 10 to 14 days to get her treatment. But she seemed to be doing well with treatment. And so after about 2 years, they discharged her from that treatment, and they felt she was ready to take on, the next journey, the next chapter of her life. And so we were like excited. She wanted to do post-secondary school, and we thought that's great. And so we got her all set up, and she moved 2,000 kilometers, so 1,300 miles away from home to start school. And as parents, this was, the next chapter, the next start of her life, as well as ours. And after she was there for a period of time, we started getting these calls. And at some times she was very happy and very talkative and all these things she was doing. And at other times she was, quiet. I didn't make it to school this week. I can't get out of bed. I can't get up. And we kind of, at first, were like, these are good days and bad days. It happens to all of us. And on my first visit, I realized that she wasn't doing well. And she said, she eventually said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm going to go see the doctor. And I think she really thought she was physically ill. And that's the way it felt. And, surprisingly enough, she was given to a team at a psychiatric outpatient hospital. She was sent to see a team of doctors. And when she came out of that, she called me and she said, well, I have a diagnosis. She said, they've diagnosed me with bipolar affective disorder type 1. And this is where, as parents getting a mental health or a mental illness diagnosis, I was thrilled. I was like, oh, something to work with. This is going to be great. We'll be able to get the treatments we need and everything will be really great. I was very naive when it came to mental illness. And I have to tell you, I knew very little about it. And on my visit back, I realized that she's going to need more supports living where she is. And so my husband and I chose for me to leave my friends, my family, my job, and we would commute 1,300 kilometers or miles, so that I could be with her where she had a team of doctors that was there and readily available to her. I thought this would be for a short period of time. She would get on her feet and away we would go in our life. My crisis came when I arrived in the city and I knew nothing about the city. I was going to start a job and I didn't even know anybody. I was starting a job. And when I walked into her apartment, I didn't recognize my daughter. I was now going to be living with a stranger. She was in full-blown mania when I arrived. And I have to say I was probably scared and panicked. I hadn't seen this before. I didn't know what I was walking into. I felt sorry for myself, like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. For a couple of weeks, I cried every single day. I called my husband, and I realized pretty quickly that if I didn't start to get help for myself, that I was going to be right there next to my daughter in a hospital bed. So I then sought out everything and anything I could in the city that I was living in to get some help for myself, because I realized that this was way bigger than my pay scale. And I was going to have to start to learn pretty quickly about how I could interact with her and how I could communicate properly and kind of deal with this. So I started going to support groups. I had signed up for a Strengthening Family Together course in which they were going to educate us, caregivers, on how to deal with mental illness. And I thought, this is perfect. This is what I need. This will be really good. I couldn't get in till the next month. So they started me going to support groups. And I didn't even know what a support group was for people with mental illness. Like, what am I walking into? I don't know. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to tell anybody my story. I'm going to sit quietly, because really we struggle in silence when we're caregiving for the mentally ill, for fear of being judged. It's something that people do readily, and people try and give you well-intended, loving advice, but it makes you feel worse. And so I walked into this support group, and after spending about an hour and a half with these people, I felt that somebody had thrown me a life vest, because it was so comforting to see a group of and a community of people that knew we were all dealing with different illnesses, but very similar circumstances. And it was comforting to be around these people. And that was kind of the start of my education and learning some tools to put in my toolbox to be able to better caregive my daughter.
What would you say, looking back and, looking at all the different, the ups and the downs, because as a parent myself, I can't imagine, having that extra worry, because we already instinctively worry about our children's safety with no other issues associated, just going out of the house every day, that they come home safe at the end of the day. What was your biggest worry, RoxAnne, and how did you manage that worry? Because like you said, I can imagine having that feeling you might end up in a bed next to her or the room next to her in a hospital because of the extra stress and worry and anxiety. What was your biggest worry overall?
That I would never see my daughter again, the person that I knew, the person that, we were tight and in a tight relationship. And I guess maybe two things. I was scared that I would never see her again. And every day I feared I would lose her to the streets, because that's very common with people with mental illness, is we lose them to the streets. So fighting for her.
Yeah. What would, do you have any recommendations of how you dealt with it that might benefit a viewer or listener that might be going or experiencing something similar?
So there's a couple of things. One was education, educate and get an information as much as you can about what you're trying to deal with, because when you start to understand what they're going through, then you can better effectively communicate with the person, and then you can start to build their trust. It's so important that we build their trust. One of the challenges that I always say with people that are dealing with mental illness, or when you walk into a crisis, is they often don't feel they're in a crisis, or that they need help, or that they need anybody to help them. And so you have to deal with that and getting their trust so that they feel that you're going to be giving them the correct and proper advice to help them is probably really crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you discuss your worries with your daughter?
My daughter's in a much better place right now. And we were told at one point that she would be living with us beyond disability for the rest of her life, and to prepare our wills accordingly, that there would be somebody to look after her. And I never believed that when I was told that. And so in fighting through all that, she now lives on her own. She has a job and she's in a healthy relationship. So, and through this, we've learned to communicate. She will always need supports, but she better understands her illness now, and she can better manage it. And we've had the time to talk about what she's gone through and how she's felt about certain things, and the guilt that she goes through of what she's put us through is a heavy burden on her. And so it's releasing her from that guilt that she's had to go through too.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say for yourself? What was one of the biggest changes for you after kind of post-crisis and, with the benefit of time and reflection, that changed for you during all of that?
I have to say, I look at the world differently. That was probably the biggest thing. When I look around now at the world and I see people that are struggling, there's no judgment anymore. There's, maybe more understanding and empathy towards those people. And I realized how much people that were there to help me in my support groups, and going forward, that really has kind of changed where I've gone with my passions and being a parenting mental health support worker in my own community and surrounding areas, and starting up with the help of Denise with her facilitators course. I have now started a parent support group in which I work with people once a week, and really just trying to be there to help other people, kind of that I always say that maybe really in the trenches and just need that person, that non-judgmental, safe space to be able to speak openly and honestly.
Yeah, and I think when it's a mental health issue, I think there's still such a stigma attached to it that it makes it hard for people to discuss and talk about it, which is really unfortunate. And hopefully with, you out there advocating, it will make it easier for others to come forward and talk about it. And if they need the help, get the help that they need. I want to talk real briefly before we go back to Denise about what did you find is the biggest challenge in an unexpected crisis when you're dealing with somebody with a mental health issue?
Yeah, it's kind of like I said, was that they often don't know they need help, or they don't even know they're in a crisis. And it's the people around them that are seeing this. And sometimes we can get them help, and sometimes we can't. So looking after ourselves during that crisis and those challenges is really, really important.
Yeah.
That's probably the main thing. Yeah.
And I think you'll probably use that as part of this answer. But my last question for you, RoxAnne, is if you had two pieces of advice for somebody who is caring for a loved one struggling with mental illness, what would the two pieces of advice be?
Never give up hope. And really, look after yourself. That will, like they always say, put your own oxygen mask on first, so that you can better look after the people that are struggling with the mental illness.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I am so glad to hear that it sounds like your daughter is doing phenomenally well. And congratulations to you both.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll go to Denise.
So this is an opportunity for us to have a conversation about best practices. And RoxAnne gave us a couple of really great sound bites. And there was one that I'd like to start with, and that is that we struggle in silence. And I think about that struggle, which really just weighs us down. Angelena, I wonder if you could share a little bit about when you felt that struggle in silence, and then what helped you find your voice.
For me, the struggle in silence went for pretty much months, maybe even a year before I said enough is enough. I would ask, different family members. I had a lot of different family members that would offer to do different things. I did have a couple of my sisters helping out. I did have, various other family members that would cook meals. They would help with laundry, things of that nature. But when it came to like the in-depth day-to-day stuff where it was like, I need someone here with him, or I need a break, or I need things of that nature, it was very hard to come by. I would get offers from certain people, and it would turn into well, I have this to do, or it would turn into something that was, my thing is more important than your thing of having to take care of your dad. So I would sit in silence. I would kind of let it eat me up inside, where it was, okay, well, other people have their other things going on. But then I put my foot down and I'm like, okay, well, this is very important. This is, a human life that we're dealing with. This is, yes, everyone has day-to-day stressors. Everyone has work. Everyone has other things. But my ideal is, if you have a loved one that you really care about, whether it's a friend, family member, whatever, if they need your help, you're going to step up. You shouldn't have to wait. They shouldn't have to wait for you to ask. That should be an immediate, hey, I know you're struggling. I know you're putting your life on hold. I'm going to come help you. So I found my voice probably within like that first year. And ever since then, it's been much better. It's been a much better experience.
I think about enduring, and I have thought about this a lot since my caregiving experience ended. This idea that we for me, it became almost like this habit of, I just have to endure this, that others aren't going to show up to help, or that it's going to be hard for me today. I just have to endure this. And what I realized is that is a place of sacrifice. And when you are in that place of enduring, which becomes sacrifice, it's very difficult to feel good in the day. So, Debbie, I'm wondering, how do we fight this temptation to just stay silent about the struggle?
I did that for so many years. I felt that if I asked for help, I was a failure as a daughter, a mother, a wife, a caregiver. And I was so incredibly wrong because oftentimes some people do want to help, they just don't know how. So you might have to give them something specific. I was, often disappointed by, like Angelena said, some people who would not prioritize my situation over their, day-to-day stuff. But you have to ask for what you need, because for the longest time, I just assumed that other people should realize how I was feeling and what I needed. And that was a mistake.
Well, I want to mention we are great mind readers as family caregivers. We are able to adjust and adapt and understand what someone needs. And especially because we spend so much time with our carees, we just know. And that's a gift. And it's also a very rare talent. Others don't have that. And so they can't read our mind. We can read our carees, but others can't read our mind. And I think that does take us a little bit of time to figure that out, that I have to express what I need in order to have that need met. RoxAnne, you talked a little bit about really taking care of your own mental well-being. And I'm curious how you can suggest to someone who is struggling with perhaps managing their own mental well-being, how can they reach out to find the right help for themselves as a family caregiver?
I think that it might take a while to find a community, and, looking into support groups, looking into community organizations. I do have to say that when you do have a mental illness, though, a lot of people, and especially more in small communities, they don't want people seeing them walk into a mental health crisis area or walk into a mental health building. And so I have to say the world of virtual has really, I think, helped us all a little bit more in the fact that we have that community and we can do it in the privacy of our own home, and we can have our screen off or our screen on, whatever we feel most comfortable at the time doing. So I think that that's a real big plus for people that are looking to get supports. Just find them out there. If it needs to start with virtual, then start with virtual. And listen to what goes on. And when you're ready to come forward and speak, then the opportunity would be there.
I have two last questions for you guys. First one being, we've been talking a little bit about how do we identify ourselves during our caregiving experience. Lance had talked about whether or not we identify as a family caregiver. And what I've heard each of you talk about is the identity that came out because of a caregiving experience, but that is in addition to being a family caregiver. Angelena, when you gave your introduction, you identified as a pageant winner. So give us that title again, and then tell us the other identities that you have as a fully dimensional person.
My title is Miss USA World Universal Ambassador, and this journey as a caregiver brought out many different hats that I never would have possibly imagined. It started with my desire to go back to school, taking that time off to take care of my dad. I thought I might go back to school to pursue a PhD program. But once I pursued scholarship opportunities and saw, everything was greater beyond just winning that title, winning that crown, and winning that scholarship, I wanted to keep going, to keep being a community advocate. And it's been a very enlightening experience. I've joined several different fellowships, caregiving fellowships. I've done Caring Across Generations. I'm with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation as a military caregiver fellow. It's been an amazing experience, and I'm proud to have made it this far in my journey. And it shows other caregivers that even though you are in this situation, you don't have to give up you don't have to give up on what your dreams are, and there's a much greater outcome that can evolve from it.
Yeah, I love that. It's this idea that we don't have to put limits on us. We just might have to look for where else we can go in our life. Just that pivot from where we thought to where we can go. And Debbie, when we were talking, you started writing your book and you actually published a book. So you are a book author. Tell us about how else you identify yourself today.
Today, I'm a multi-passionate entrepreneur. I have a few different businesses, and I'm an author, a speaker, a podcast host, things that I never could have imagined. And looking back over my life of caregiving, it has changed me in so many ways and shown me how strong I am, how capable I am, and given me the confidence and the voice to, become who I am today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. RoxAnne, how would you describe your identities today?
So my life has kind of went from a caregiving into this passion to help other people caregive. I have just recently, I partnered with the Firefly, which is a youth and child and youth mental health service here where I live, as well as our local hospital, Lake of the Woods District Hospital, and CMHA Fort Francis, as well as a Parents for Children's Mental Health. So I'm partnered with all of those. They all have acronyms that I've got to try and remember. But I do that in working with support groups and people one-on-one to help them just kind of be better caregivers for what they do.
RoxAnne, we're going to stay with you for our last question that we're going to have our panelists answer, and that is, you're writing an entry in your journal, and it's the entry for the day that you walked into the apartment and saw what was happening with your daughter. What's the title of that journal entry?
Will I ever see or know my daughter like I used to?
Wow. Wow. Debbie, we'll go to you. So on any of those days where there was a significant medical crisis, you're writing in your journal, what's the entry title for that day?
Nothing could have prepared me for this.
Ah, yeah. Wow. And I think we'll close with you, Angelena. So it's that day where you returned home, you realized your dad has had a stroke. It's the end of that long day. You're starting to write in your journal. What's the entry title about that day?
I think I would call my entry Lost. That's how I felt.
Yeah, lost. Wow, lost. Yeah. Lance, I'll throw it back to you.
Well, I just want to say thank you again to each of you for joining Denise and I here on the Caregivers Journal and, sharing your journal entry with us. We encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Denise, always good to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lance. And thanks to all of you, our panelists today. And thanks for our viewers and our listeners. We would love for you to also share your stories in the comments. It's so helpful for us to hear about your experiences.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us again here at the Caregivers Journal, where we're talking with caregivers about their experiences and their caregiving journey. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.